this is Priyanshi, and today we will study class 12th, chapter 5. And this chapter is called Therapeutic Approaches and Counseling. So often it is, understood by us कि psychology मतलब disorders होता है ना? और disorder का मतलब हो गया therapy या फिर counseling. But actually, if I talk फ्रॉम अ व्यू पॉइंट ऑफ करियर कि सबसे ज़्यादा स्कोप किस में है नॉल तो आई थिंक सबसे ज़्यादा स्कोप अभी एट प्रेजेंट साइकोलॉजी में इफ़ देर इज़ तो या तो क्लिनिकल में है या फिर काउंसलिंग में है सो we have covered a bit of we started a little on clinical psychology in our previous chapter which we were discussing about disorders. Okay, in this chapter we will talk about another very important bit which is known as counseling, which is another very important aspect of psychology. So here we will cover nature and process of psychotherapy and therapeutic relationship, types of therapies, behavior therapy, cognitive therapy, humanistic existential therapy, alternative therapies. We will study about yoga and rehabilitation of the mentally ill. So, whenever we say psychotherapies, we can break this term into two, psycho and therapy. We have heard of stuff like physiotherapy, right? Which is physical therapy. Now, psychotherapy is the one that talks about psychological well being of an individual. Physiotherapy talks about the physiological well being of an individual. So, psychotherapy, mein we will talk about it's actually a voluntary relationship. Voluntary से मतलब हो गया consensual. दोनों पार्टीज एग्री करती हैं रिलेशनशिप बनाने में between one seeking treatment or the client. We usually do not use the word patient or subject anymore, we use the word client, and the one who treats or therapist and is given under therapeutic condition. Therapeutic conditions का मतलब हो गया ethics and rules and norms and this that. So we have a set of rules and conditions which are known as therapeutic conditions जिसके रहते a person forms a consensual voluntary relationship between the client and the therapist. Now, why are we stressing so much on this particular therapeutic relationship? Why are we not like jumping on how kind of therapies we are talking about, how is therapy given? It is important because therapy is the kind of thing जिसमें a person tends to open up, a person tends to express a lot about their lives, and this kind of therapy has to be free from legal jeopardy. Often it is like therapy में लोग जाते हैं and they confess crimes, they confess about raping someone, they confess about murdering someone, they confess stuff which is socially not acceptable, and somewhere that does not backfire on the therapist, that does not backfire on the client. That is why we have to have therapeutic conditions. Okay, so we can talk about Dear Zindagi का example जिसमें डॉक्टर जहांगीर एंड आलिया भट्ट फॉर्म a therapeutic relationship, psychotherapeutic relationship. So that is a classical example. So the purpose is to help the client solve their psychological problems being faced by her or him. And the aim is to change the maladaptive behaviors, decrease the sense of personal distress, and help the client to adapt better to their environment. The relationship is conducive for building the trust of the client so that the problem may be freely discussed. Now, if you talk about this particular point, the aim, we're talking about maladaptive behaviors, we're talking about sense of personal distress to be decreasing, and we're again talking about client to adapt to their environment. So over here we're not helping the client become a whole new person. It's not like you go in depressed and you come out happy. It's not like that. It's like you tend to accept your problems. Okay, the best way of dealing with something is to accept it, and the therapist sitting across from you helps you face your problems, unpack your baggage. तो वो आपको बेसिकली उस मेंटली हालत में ले आता है जहाँ पर आप अपनी प्रॉब्लम्स को ढंग से फेस कर सकें, उनको कंड्यूसिवली ट्रीट कर सकें, उन्हें पर्पसफुली एक्ट कर सकें. दे आर नॉट चेंजिंग यू एज अ पर्सन बट दे आर helping you look on the greener side of the whole thing. That's it. So the characteristics are psychotherapies are systematic application of some theory or principle. The therapist must be a trained professional. Very important. In India, often people do not have a license in psychotherapy and yet they do therapy, which is a scam. And psychotherapy is an interactive process in which two people are involved, the client and the therapist, which is very understood. So, psychotherapy functions under therapeutic relationship, which is trusting, accepting, confiding, dynamic, professional relationship. It has to be professional. It cannot be personal. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि आप अपने किसी personal relationship को बिठा के कहें चलो भाई तुम परेशान लगते हो तुम्हें therapy देते हैं. This is not how it works. You have to be in a professional sound, professional setup. You have to have professional relationships with them, and when you start with professional relationships you cannot form personal relationships with people, right? Your client has to be a client. They cannot become your friend, girlfriend, boyfriend, lover, husband, wife, nothing. They have to be a client, and somebody who you have personal relationships with, you cannot give therapy to them. So the goals are to reinforce clients resolve for betterment, lessening emotional pressure, unfolding the potential of positive growth, being optimistic, modifying habits, changing thinking patterns, increasing self awareness, improving interpersonal relationships and communication, facilitation decision making, becoming aware of one's choice in life. And I guess I wrote this point twice, but never mind. So, relating to one's social environment in a more creative and self aware manner. So, therapeutic relationships can also be called an alliance because it is an alliance of a kind. So, the contractual nature this relationship helps in making sure that this particular alliance or relationship that you have formed does not become toxic or does not become a depending factor for the client. Like for example, what happens is, let's talk about it in physiological terms. Okay, you are ill supposedly and you go to a doctor and the doctor says okay 6 महीने का कोर्स है आपका एंड आप अपनी दवाइयाँ शुरू कीजिए ना. क्या होता है ना, दे मेक श्योर आप 2 महीने बाद अपना फिर चेकअप कराएं. फिर अब तो ज़्यादा होता है बट टेक्निकली 2 महीने बाद यू मेक श्योर यू गेट चेकड ऑफन एंड ऑफन ऑफन, राइट? एंड इन दैट दे हैव टू शो कि ओके आपने इतना प्रोग्रेस किया. अगर आपने उतना प्रोग्रेस नहीं किया दे विल प्रॉब्लली चेंज योर ट्रीटमेंट, दे विल चेंज योर मेडिकेशंस. ओके, पर से आपका ट्रीटमेंट 6 महीने बाद नहीं चलता, देन यू विल चेंज योर डॉक्टर, राइट? बट this is when you're able to see physiological change. But when you're talking about psychological change, when we are talking about affect, and very important student by the way, affect and effect are two different words. Effect होता है किसी चीज का consequence, किसी चीज का resultant. Affect से we are talking about something which is emotional in its फाउंडेशन. ओके, सो अगर हम बात करें साइकोलॉजिकल चेंज या फिर एफेक्ट चेंज की, तो पॉसिबिलिटी है कि आपको वो जल्दी से ना दिखे, या फिर वी टेंड टू हैव सो मेनी कॉम्प्लेक्स इमोशंस. आवर इमोशंस आर वेरी कॉम्प्लेक्स. दे आर नॉट हैप्पी, सैड, cry, angry. They are not like that anymore. They are very complicated. And so this is precisely why this particular relationship has to be contractual in nature. There has to be a partnership, there has to be a start to it, there has to be an end to it. You can just not carry it on and on and on. If you see there is no progress happening to you, you have to leave. And often what happens is you are seeking therapy for the first time and you're not an expert at getting therapies. Okay, possibly आपने therapy 2-3 बार करी हो, but again you're not a pro at it. But the person giving you therapy is a therapist, and they know what kind of therapies they are giving you. They know what kind of progress you should be showing. And for example, that kind of therapy that they are giving you is not working. It is their professional, I would say, ethic, professional integrity कि वो आपको बोले see, I would suggest you another therapist. Go check them out. This is not working. In a very polite manner, they make sure to tell you that. They're not supposed to rip you off your money and like not even be of the worthy of the money that you're paying to them. So if you pay them a fee, you have to see some changes. You just cannot become dependent. Similarly, your therapists are very confiding people. They are very trusting, and you can be very comfortable with them. And this is the kind of profession that they are in. Therapy is very complex in itself. So they are the kind of people जिसमें आप जाकर हर चीज़ बता सकें, आपको बहुत positive environment मिले. You may start getting a lot of positive, regard from them. But the thing is, they are your therapist at the end of the day, right? They are your therapist. You just cannot stay with them. You just cannot spend your so much time with them. And होता क्या है ना, यूजुअली जब हम बहुत लंबे टाइम तक थेरेपी लेते रहते हैं तो we become dependent on our therapist. We become, sort of obsessed. Okay, fine, this person is my rant box, I will go and talk to them. This is not how it is supposed to be. So if you, like, for you to not become dependent on your therapist, that is again a reason why therapists have to be contractual, because therapies can be addicting. So as I said, there has to be a limited duration, क्योंकि एक end और एक start होना is very important. So the properties of therapeutic relationships are that they are trusting and confiding relationships, because they have to be so. अब देखो, आप डॉक्टर के पास जाएंगे. सो मेरी टीचर ने ये मुझे कैसे समझाई थी. सो शी सेड कि अगर आप डॉक्टर के पास जाएं, यू मे टेल देम ओपनली, ओके आई हैव अ फीवर एंड आई एट दिस एंड दिस दैट. बट पर से आपको कोई एसटीडी हो गई है, सेक्सुअली ट्रांसमिटेड डिसीज, यू मे फील अ लिटिल हेजिटेंट कि okay, I have to go and tell them, I got chlamydia and this that. So because sexually transmitted disease and sex related things are often a taboo in the society. Now, talking about psychological I would say disorders, or talking about psychological syndromes, it is even bigger a taboo. It's even bigger a taboo. So if you want to talk about that, people may not be socially very accepting of it. And psychology में सबसे बड़ा problem is stigma. There is a lot of stigma and stereotyping to it. So when you are in a kind of turbulent state, and you're dealing with a lot in your life and you do not know where to go, it is expected of your therapist to be trusting and confiding, so that you stay honest with them, that there are no biases. राइट आप अपनी चीज़ों को फैब्रिकेट करके नहीं बोले. चलो मान लेते हैं कि आप अपने थेरेपिस्ट के पास जाते हो, उसको झूठ झूठ बोल के आ जाते हैं. आफ्टर अ पॉइंट द थेरेपिस्ट विल नो दैट यू लाइंग टू देम, बट दे कैन नॉट टेल, पुश यू कि चलो हमें आप सच बताओ. दे कांट डू दैट. ऑल दे कैन डू इज रैपो फॉर्मेशन, so that you become comfortable with them and you begin to tell them the truth, right? And they are trained to be so. They are usually very convincing people, and they try to make you very comfortable, and so that you tell them the truth. And this is exactly why these relationships have to be very trusting and confiding, because अगर आप एक बात को थोड़ा सा 1 की जगह 1.10000001 भी बता देंगे ना, it will change the way a therapist looks at you. It will change their conclusions, observations about you. And this is exactly why they do not want you to lie to them. उनका कुछ नहीं जा रहा. You're just wasting their time, but you're also wasting your money, which is very precious. And therapies, as we know, are very expensive. Nevertheless, okay. So the high level of trust enables the client to unburden himself to the therapist, and confide her his psychological and personal problems to the latter. So then, as I said, ki psychology में there are 4 pillars, and 4 pillars may be, if be it your the way you look at disorders, or be it the way you do the therapy, they will always be there, right? So we will talk about behavior therapy. So इसमें सबसे major is CBT, जो बहुत ज़्यादा widely practice होती है. Anyway, so this focuses on the behavior and thoughts of the client in the present. The past is relevant only to extent of understanding the origins of faulty behavior, and thought patterns are not relieved. So there are things such as past, present and future. यूजुअली हम अपने प्रेजेंट में 2 रीजंस की वजह से परेशान होते हैं. या तो हम अपने पास्ट की वजह से परेशान होते हैं, या फिर हम अपने फ्यूचर की वजह से परेशान होते हैं. हम अपने फ्यूचर की वजह से परेशान इसलिए होते हैं क्योंकि हमारे पास्ट और प्रेजेंट में कुछ अच्छा नहीं चल रहा होता, और हम प्रेजेंट में बहुत ज़्यादा परेशान इसलिए हो जाते हैं क्योंकि हमारे पास्ट में कुछ अच्छा नहीं हुआ होता है. इफ़ यू हैव हैड सम सॉर्ट ऑफ ट्रॉमा, सम सॉर्ट ऑफ accident or whatever, some sort of very dear and near loss to you, that is your past, and that is somehow malfunctioning your present behavior. Similarly, if you have been depressed for a while, this will function the way, this will actually cause maladaptive behavior in your future and your present. It does not have anything to do with the past. So in behavior therapy, we are mostly looking at your present, कि आपके साथ present में क्या हो रहा है. If you're showing some sort of behavior, then why is it happening? We will look into that. We will try to understand you. We will make sure कि you do not repeat that behavior. And the past is only relevant up to a point कि हम ये समझें कि ये behavior आ कहाँ से रहा है. What is the root to this behavior. फ्यूचर इज ऑल्सो रेलिवेंट अप टू दैट पॉइंट, क्योंकि फ्यूचर से वी गेट अ लॉट ऑफ एनजाइटी. हमारे को एनजाइटी कभी पास से नहीं, हमेशा फ्यूचर से होती है. पास तो हम जी चुके हैं, पास से कभी एनजाइटी नहीं होगी. एनजाइटी हमें फ्यूचर से होती है, हमारे को पैनिक फ्यूचर से आता है. एंड ऑफन एनजाइटी एंड पैनिक आर सच टू ingredients that could lead to depression. So that is it. Anyway, behavior therapy is a clinical application of learning theories, consists a large set of specific techniques and intervention systems. Symptoms of client and the clinical diagnosis are guiding factors in the selection of specific techniques or interventions to be applied. Now, if you look at it, there are words such as intervention, symptom, and intervention. Now, what are we talking about? Intervention. Let's cut it down to it. As you know, government has a scheme such as midday meal in school, right? Now, why do we have midday meals? अब ऐसे थोड़ी ना कि we suddenly woke up and we were like, oh, chalo, let's feed the poor of India. No, it's not like that. Midday meal is there because we want to fix and in fact improve the literacy rate in India. The purpose behind this intervention. And since there was a root cause problem, we had to place an intervention. So the fact कि हमें लगता है कि इंडिया में a lot of children do not get a nutritious meal and the parents are not able to provide for them, look after them, they are not able to arrange 2 square meals for the children. So they were like, अच्छा चलो कोई बात नहीं, at least school जाके खाना तो खा के आएगा, कुछ पढ़े ना पढ़े, we don't care, at least खाना तो खाएगा. And this happened, this changed. A lot of children, a lot of mid-aged children started to come in school. So this was an intervention, it was highly successful. Okay, so now there was a problem and then we placed an intervention in between to fix it. Intervention is like MC to some sort of leakage. It fixes it. चलो एक example ले लेते हैं from the movie Tamasha. I hope everyone must have seen it. So there was this character Ved, and Ved has been dealing with a lot on his plate. उसे anxiety हो जाती है, उसे panic होने लगता है, उसे कहीं ना कहीं depersonalization feel होने लगता है. And the most important part of it was कि he really felt neglected. उसकी emotional needs were not being satisfied. And जब हमारे को intellectually लगता है कि we are not stimulated or so, our lives become a very dull place to be. Now, given Ved's situation, Ved was dealing with depression perhaps. Now, given Ved's situation, अगर हमें वेद की जगह कोई intervention prepare करना होता, so how would we do it? So now, if we talk about modern workplaces, so usually what happens in modern workplaces is that people are working and all, but they do not have customary chairs and tables. They do not have that. They have bean bags and they have very fun office outlooks and everything. Why is that? They have gyms in their office, and then they have pool tables in their office, they have actual swimming pools in their office buildings, they have a lot of stuff in their office. Why is that? इट इज़ सो बिकॉज दे नो अगर हमारे को किसी कंपनी में एक बंदे से या पूरी कंपनी से एज अ होल हमारे को प्रोडक्टिविटी ज़्यादा चाहिए, तो वी हैव टू ऑब्जर्व द बिहेवियर ऑफ आर एम्प्लॉयज़. एंड एम्प्लॉयज़ आर व्हाट लाइक 9 बजाएंगे 5 बजे भाग जाएंगे. यही होता है एम्प्लॉयज़ का आइडिया, राइट? दिस इज़ व्हाट दे डू. सो इन ऑर्डर टू फिक्स दैट बिहेवियर, इन ऑर्डर टू इम्प्रूव द प्रोडक्टिविटी ऑफ द एम्प्लॉयज़, कि चलो तुम ऑफिस में रहो और काम करो, तुम्हें जिम जाना है जिम ऑफिस में वहाँ चले जाओ, पूल जाना है ऑफिस में चले जाओ. सो इफ यू स्टे मोर टाइम इन ऑफिस यू विल इवेंचुअली स्टार्ट वर्किंग मोर. ठीक है, people exploit the facilities given by the office, but you spend more time in the office then and you start working more. So this is an intervention which was placed, and in case of Ved, I think an event where Ved could explore his own hobbies and all could help him, because hobbies do make us happy. So this was an intervention. Okay, moving on. Open therapies, that is the therapist shares his or her method with the client, and this is also very important. जैसे हमारे को डॉक्टर बताता है ना कि ओके फाइन, हम आपको 6 महीने के कोर्स पे डाल रहे हैं, आपको 4 इंजेक्शन लगेंगे and all. Similarly, a therapist has to tell the person कि okay, this is the what I have been thinking about you, and this is the kind of therapy and this is the method that we will follow. So the method of treatment is the client is interviewed with a view to analyze his or her behavior patterns. Behavior analysis is conducted to find malfunctioning behavior, antecedent factors and maintaining factors. तो मैल फंक्शनिंग बिहेवियर वो होता है जो एक्चुअली में हमारा बिहेवियर है, जो हमें डिस्ट्रेस कॉज कर रहा है, द काइंड ऑफ बिहेवियर जो मैल अडेप्टिव इन नेचर, जो वियर्ड है, जो एक्चुअली में ऐसा बिहेवियर है जिसकी वजह से हम थेरेपी सीख कर रहे हैं. Like, for example, let's go back to Ved's example. Ved ratted out to his boss, although his boss was very toxic one. But that is something that you do not do to your boss. Do not make fun of your bosses. So there was a distressing behavior, right? He was leading a very monotonous life, a life that he was not getting stimulated by. So this was a malfunctioning behavior. Now, what is the antecedent factor to it? Now, why is there a reason always predisposed in a person towards a behavior? We all have some sort of diathesis. We have studied this in last chapter. We have a diathesis which is known as predisposed vulnerability towards something or the other. जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल इन अ वेरी बेस लाइन एग्जाम्पल, हम में से कुछ लोगों को, जैसे फॉर एग्जाम्पल मेरे को जेनेटिकली मेरे को जुकाम वगैरह ज़्यादा होता है. आई हैव अ साइनस प्रॉब्लम. सो साइनसाइटिस एंड ऑल, माई फादर हैज़ इट, माई ग्रैंड फादर हैज़ इट, माई होल पेटर्नल लाइन हैज़ इट. So similarly, I also have it. The thing is, as soon as I'm in a dusty environment or as in a pollutive environment, I begin to show signs of cold and cough and fever and this and that. So why is that? Because there is a predisposed vulnerability in my system about the whole thing. And जैसे ही कोई ऐसी सिचुएशन आती है, जैसे मान लो कोई ज़्यादा स्ट्रेस आ गया या फिर धूल आ गई, मिट्टी आ गई या फिर पोल्यूशन ज़्यादा हो जाता है, तो मेरी वो प्रीडिस्पोज वल्नरेबिलिटी ट्रिगर हो जाती है, right? And this is an antecedent factor. The maintaining factors are the factors which lead to persistent of the faulty behavior. चलो ठीक है, हमारा एक predisposed vulnerability है, हमारी किसी चीज़ को उसने ट्रिगर कर दिया, but then it goes down, right? But the fact that I live in Delhi NCR, the fact that I live in the most polluted zone of India, it is a maintaining factor towards the kind of cold that I get each and every week. क्योंकि एक तो मेरी प्रीडिस्पोज वल्नरेबिलिटी है ही, दूसरा ऊपर से antecedent factors like dust, pollution, air and all of that, and then that I live on top of everything, I live in an environment जहाँ ये कभी नीचे जाता ही नहीं है, it's always high, the AQI of NCR is so bad, so that is a maintaining factor towards my health. So the antecedent operations are control behavior by changing something that precedes such behavior. तो मान लीजिए आप किसी बिहेवियर को चेंज करना चाहते हैं, तो हाउ वुड यू डू दैट? एक तो आप अपने आप को समझाएंगे, ओके फाइन, मेरा ये बिहेवियर करंटली मुझे इतना नेगेटिवली इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है, तो मैं इसमें से ये चेंजेस कर देता हूँ तो पॉजिटिवली इम्पैक्ट करेगा. बट ऑफन द पीपल दैट गो टू थेरेपी हैव लॉस्ट their rationality, they have lost their I would say psychological well-being to think about something like that. तो अब किसे चेंज करेंगे? Now somebody else steps in and does it for you. Now how does they do it? They actually put in positive and negative reinforcements. We'll study about this over here, but they put such reinforcements and another stuff so that आपका behavior खुद ब खुद change होने लगे. They establish operations such as induce a change in behavior by increasing or decreasing the reinforcing value of a particular consequence. The consequent operations such as giving reinforcement, example, praise, etc. etc. It's obvious. होता ही है, जैसे बचपन में I remember it. I was asked कि Priyansh, this time you will not become the monitor, somebody else. And I was like, who will become the monitor? Because I was usually the monitor in the class. And the most naughty child, सबसे troublesome बच्चे को मैम ने मॉनिटर बना दिया. I was like, इसको मॉनिटर क्यों बनाया है? ये तो सबसे शैतान है, इसको मॉनिटर करने के लिए तो हम मॉनिटर बनते हैं. So now that I'm all grown up and everything, I understand the reason why that the child was made a monitor was because often you tend to change your behavior when an ideal model behavior is presented before you. राइट। उसके लिए मॉनिटर बनना वाज अ पॉजिटिव रीइंफोर्समेंट, एंड उसका शैतान बिहेवियर स्टार्टेड डिक्रीज जब उसकी रिइंफोर्सिंग वैल्यू कम हो गई। उसको प्रेज में लगे, अरे वाह, एवरीबडी इज क्वाइट, यू आर अ गुड मॉनिटर, सो यू बिगिन टू बिलीव यू आर अ गुड मॉनिटर एंड यू स्टार्ट टू डू योर जॉब इवन बेटर। Right, you if you remember, we used to have star of the kid and boards in our class जिस पे हमें golden stars and black stars मिलते थे for a good and bad behavior. Now what was that? That was simple consequent operation. तुम जैसा काम करोगे तुम्हें appraisal मिलता है। जब हमें appraise मिलती है हमें अच्छा लगता है, and then we start to work harder. जब हमारे को नहीं मिलती है then we feel bad. Now there are two ways. या तो we feel bad and we do not do it, or we feel bad and we start to improve. Right? So this is the whole idea of changing your behavior. Anyway, so behavior techniques that we cover in behavior therapy are negative reinforcement, which is following an undesired response with an outcome that is painful or not liked. So what happened was, इसका एक classic example is a rat was placed inside a very good lab environment, एंड उसमें होता ये है कि उस वो ना एक लीवर प्रेस करता है। अब होता क्या है कि पहले उसे खाना मिलता था, तो दैट इज इंक्रीज ऑफ द डेफिसिट इफ वन कैन अडेप्ट रियली। मतलब जब क्या होता है, जब वो कुछ भी करता था उसे खाना मिलता था, वो लीवर प्रेस करा था, द पर्सन वाज गेटिंग, द रैट वाज गेटिंग फूड। नो इवेंचुअली व्हाट हैपेंड वाज, जब भी उसने लीवर प्रेस करा वो उसको करंट लगने लग गया। ऑब्वियसली नॉट वेरी ब्रूटल वन, बट उसको करंट लगता है। अब क्या होता है, जब उसको एक बार करंट लगा, पहले उसको लगता था चल मैं लीवर प्रेस करूंगा मुझे खाना मिलेगा, बट जब उसने 2-3 बार लीवर प्रेस करे और उसको फिर करंट लगने लग गया, तो उसने वो लीवर प्रेस करना बंद कर दिया। व्हाई? बिकॉज दैट इज एन अनडिजायर्ड रिस्पॉन्स। The painful the painful emotions and the painful physiological pain that the rat must have gone through, उसे वो पसंद नहीं आया, तो उसने वो करना बंद कर दिया। Similarly, if somebody has been doing rash driving for some time and उसका एक चालान हो जाता है 5-6 हज़ार का बढ़िया वाला, so the person stops doing rash driving, and that is exactly a wonderful example of negative reinforcement. आप एक बार जरा से रॉन्ग साइड चल के देखो, ऑल इट इज फॉर योर ओन सेफ्टी, बट अगेन इट इज अ रीइंफोर्समेंट, राइट? एनीवे, aversive conditioning is repeated association of undesired response with an aversive consequence of present reality. Okay, so usually what happens is we tend to escape from reality. ये हमारी आदत होती है as humans. We love to enjoy luxury and comfort and happiness and this and that, but we somehow want to escape from a brutal reality, from a sad honesty, right? तो क्या होता है जब हम बार बार किसी एक पर्टिकुलर मैं कहूँगी स्टिमुलाई को, जो हमारी रियलिटी से आ रहा है, एक ऐसी चीज के साथ कंडीशन कर लें जो हमें बैड रिस्पॉन्स दे रही हो, जो हमें बहुत अच्छी फीलिंग नहीं दे रही हो, और इस पूरे का द होल कनेक्शन इज कॉजिंग एन एवर्सिव रिस्पॉन्स। Like for example, if you remember, there was this experiment I must have told you about, classical conditioning, जहाँ पे एक बच्चे को हमेशा एक स्टिमुलाई क्या था, एक रैट नहीं, एक रैबिट प्रेजेंट करना, एक फरी एनिमल प्रेजेंट करना। तो होता क्या था, देयर वाज दिस लिटिल चाइल्ड पीटर, एंड ये जे वॉटसन का एक्सपेरिमेंट है एक्चुअली। सो व्हाट हैपेंड वाज, अ child called Peter was presented with a furry animal each time, and as when the child was presented with a furry animal, per se a rabbit, एक बहुत स्कैरी बैंग बहुत ही गंदी सी आवाज आती थी, एंड द चाइल्ड वुड स्टार्ट क्राइंग। नाउ आफ्टर अ पॉइंट जब ये कंसिक्वेंटली होता रहा, तो होता ये है कि जब भी से उसको जरा सा फरी एनिमल दिख जाता था कहीं ऐसे ही रैंडमली, द चाइल्ड स्टार्टेड टू क्राई. Why? Because he thought that maybe this time he'll again hear a very scary sound and the child will be scared and they'll start crying. Although the child did not hear a scary sound this time, but उसने conditioning ऐसी कर ली कि okay, every time I see something furry, it has to be that animal जिसके साथ बहुत scary आवाज आती थी, and so I'll start crying. So this is repeated association of undesired response with an aversive consequence of present reality. So token economy. Very classical example to explain this would be, I don't know if you know it, but usually what happens in, I don't know about Indian prisons, but I know about American prisons. So usually what happens there is if you are an inmate for a long time, inmate से तुम्हारे को लाइफ सेंटेंस मिला है, तो दैट इज कि तुम्हें पूरी जिंदगी तो अपनी जेल में ही काटनी पड़ी, यू आर नॉट गुड इनफ फॉर द सोसाइटी अपेरेंटली. बट वहां पे भी क्या होता है ना, you do not get reincarnated or you do not get on parole or whatever as soon as possible. आपका you're not let out as soon. But what happens is, if you are on good behavior and the jailer sees you, okay, fine, this particular inmate has been on best behavior for a long time, they give you a token. A token could be something like, chalo theek hai, you get points, you get this and you get that. And whenever you accumulate them, when you started accumulating them, and after a point you can buy something for yourself, such as you can get a book, you can get cigarette, you could possibly get a soap, you could get a magazine, poster, this and that. So this is token economy. Another example would be, we play games, right? આજકાલ we play a lot of internet games and this that. So what happens there is, वहाँ पे you collect coins, and आप जाके फिर coins collect करते रहते हो. So what are coins? अब ऐसे थोड़ी आपके हाथ में पैसे आ रहे हैं. No, you're collecting them coins, okay, and those are tokens, and then you eventually get to buy something for yourself, per se, a new character, a new outfit, a new car, or new that. So this is the idea of token economy. So in games, it is actually you begin to win, so that is a wanted behavior, right? That is a wanted behavior. In the example of jail I gave you, being on best behavior, not causing trouble to your other inmates, that is wanted behavior. So to introduce wanted behavior, they introduced token economy. Okay, differential reinforcement. So unwanted behavior can be reduced by introducing negative reinforcement, and wanted behavior, which is positive reinforcement, can be increased simultaneously. Like I told you in the example of that bacha that became monitor and I didn't, that was differential reinforcement. उसका नेगेटिव reinforcement कम कैसे कर दिया, जब उसको एक पॉजिटिव रीइंफोर्समेंट के साथ इंट्रोड्यूस किया. आप एक बार एक ऐसे बच्चे को तारीफ करके देखो जो पढ़ाई में अच्छा नहीं हो, कि अरे वाह तुमने बहुत अच्छा काम किया है, ट्रस्ट मी दैट चाइल्ड विल वर्क हार्ड in studying the next time, क्योंकि he wants to be praised, he wants to get that negative reinforcement to be lowered, and he wants to have that positive reinforcement, that positive feeling, जो अच्छा feel हुआ कि आपने कहा अरे वाह तो बहुत अच्छा काम किया तुमने. So that happens, right? Similarly, why do we have this employee of the month, and the star of the for this kind of awards in offices? Why do we have that? This is because कि लोगों को लगे अच्छा चलो ये अवार्ड होता है, हमें एटलीस्ट अवार्ड चाहिए, वो अवार्ड पाने के लिए अच्छा अच्छा काम करते हैं, क्योंकि दैट इज द वांटेड बिहेवियर टू गेट दैट अवार्ड, राइट? एंड उस प्रोसेस में जब आप वांटेड बिहेवियर शो करने लेते हो, आपका नेगेटिव बिहेवियर डाउन हो जाता है, एंड दिस इज हाउ ह्यूमंस गेट कंडीशनड ऑल द टाइम. Okay, so systematic desensitization introduced by vote for treating phobias or irrational fears. So the client is interviewed to elicit fear provoking situations. With the client, the therapist prepares a hierarchy of anxiety provoking stimuli with the least anxiety provoking stimuli at the bottom. The therapist relaxes the client and asks the client to think about least anxiety provoking situation. And the client is asked to stop thinking of the situation if tension is felt, because obviously we don't want to traumatize you. Over sessions, the client is able to imagine more severe provoking, fear provoking situations while maintaining the relaxation. The client gets systematically desensitized to the fear. Now, if you remember, I just told you an example of that furry animal and rabbit about the child Peter. उसको Peter वाला example कहते हैं, by the way, little Peter. तो होता ये है कि जब उसको बार बार डर होने लग गया, सो पेरेंट्स ऑफ द चाइल्ड वर लाइक, ओ माय गॉड व्हाट हैव यू डन टू आवर किड. सो दे अगेन गो टू दैट साइकोलॉजिस्ट जे वॉटसन, एंड जे वॉटसन वाज लाइक, आई डोंट नो हाउ टू फिक्स दिस, क्योंकि एवरी टाइम दैट चाइल्ड वाज शोन अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ इट, भले से वो असली एनिमल हो ना हो, ही स्टार्टेड क्राइंग एंड दैट वाज स्कैरी. So the person working with Watson at that time was Mary Hopkins, and she was like, okay, let's do one thing, हम धीरे धीरे दिखाते हैं, थोड़ा दूर से दिखाएंगे, फिर थोड़ा पास से दिखाएंगे. और फिर उन्होंने क्या करा, उन्होंने कहा चलो एक काम करते हैं, अभी तक इस बच्चे की कंडीशनिंग ऐसी हुई है कि जब भी उसे एक फरी एनिमल दिखेगा एक गंदी सी आवाज आती है, एंड दैट इज व्हाई द चाइल्ड यूज्ड टू गेट स्केयर्ड. दैट इज हाउ कंडीशनिंग हैपेंड. सो जब उन्होंने क्या करा, एक फरी एनिमल को एक पॉजिटिव प्लेजेंट फीलिंग के साथ अटैच कर दिया। बहुत प्यारा सा म्यूजिक बजने लग गया, फ्लावर्स एंड एवरीथिंग। तो क्या होता है, अब बच्चा जिस चीज को एक स्केरी स्टिमुलाई के साथ प्रेजेंट करने की सोचता था, द वे ही यूज्ड टू गिव अ बैड रिस्पॉन्स, अभी उसने एक प्लेजेंट रिस्पॉन्स देना शुरू कर दिया, उसकी अब कंडीशनिंग रिवर्स हो गई, वो डिसेंसिटाइज हो गया, है ना। एंड नाउ द पर्सन कुड इवन प्ले विद द एनिमल्स, वो फरी एनिमल्स को टच भी कर सकता था। तो दिस इज डिसेंसिटाइजेशन up to a level जहाँ पर बच्चा, the child Peter gets desensitized towards his fear phobia of furry animals. Modeling is the procedure wherein the client learns to behave in a certain way by observing the behavior of a model or therapist who initially acts as a role model. Vicarious learning by observing others is used and through a process of rewarding small changes in the behavior. The client gradually learns to acquire behavior of the model. Now, modeling seems like a very complex way of, introducing a technique in behavioral therapy, but it's actually very simple. It's actually the simplest of all. Have you ever seen how children play घर घर? छोटे बच्चे घर घर खेलते हैं, हम I'm sure हम सबने खेला है घर घर, टीचर टीचर, हॉस्पिटल हॉस्पिटल. Now what is that if not an example of modeling? हम एक पर्टिकुलर आइडियल बिहेवियर को देखते हैं, हम अपने घर में देखते हैं, सुबह मम्मी उठती हैं, पापा को गुड मॉर्निंग कहती हैं, चाय बना के दोनों पीते हैं, पापा ऑफिस जाते हैं, मम्मी हमें तैयार करके स्कूल भेजती है। सो दिस इज हाउ वी लुकिंग एट थिंग्स, ये मेरी रियलिटी है, किसी और की रियलिटी हो सकती है परहैप्स। उसके पापा चाय बनाते हैं, बच्चों को तैयार करते हैं, मम्मी ऑफिस जाती है, दोनों मम्मी पापा ऑफिस जाते हैं, कोई और तैयार करता है छोटे बच्चे को। तो दिस इज द रियलिटी, दिस इज द आइडियल बिहेवियर अ चाइल्ड ऑब्जर्व्स। एंड वो क्या करता है, वो घर घर में यूजुअली यही स्टोरी लाइन यूज करता है, मैं सुबह उठूंगी, फिर मैं चाय बनाऊंगी, एंड दिस इज ऑल। बट वेयर इज दिस आइडिया कमिंग फ्रॉम? Let's go back to it. It is coming from what we have seen, the kind of movies we watch, the serials we look at. I'm sure at some point of time हम सबने CID खेला है. Now what it is if not modeling? So, rational emotive therapy under cognitive therapy, which was given by Albert Ellis, talks about irrational beliefs that mediate between antecedent events and their consequences. For example, when we are very young, we tend to form, relations, and we tend to form association between things and the kind of emotions we have for them, right? The affect we have for them. And often, when we form them in our childhood, when our frontal lobe is not very developed, the possibility of them being irrational, them being poorly thought is very high, right? So when we begin to build a lot upon those thoughts and beliefs and fears and phobias, then this becomes a maladaptive problem for us. This results in maladaptive behavior. So the first step in RAT is antecedent, then belief, and then consequence. We will analyze each one of them one after another, and that is we will talk about what is your predisposed vulnerability towards it, and what belief do you have towards it, and then what is it consequently falling over your behavior, how is it affecting you. So antecedent event which cause the psychological distress are noted, and client is thoroughly interviewed to find them out. And irrational beliefs which are distorting the reality, which is somehow some often what happens is this kind of therapy is not in use because we grow, we tend to form newer associations, and then we forget what we had for them, right? But for example, if this does not happen, then they tend to become a very big problem and they begin to distort the reality of an individual, and that becomes a problem. So the irrational beliefs which are distorting the reality are also broken down in a systematic classical manner. The therapist encourages this by being very accepting, empathetic, and not sympathetic, genuine, and warm to the client. So the next therapy is Aaron Beck's cognitive therapy. So the core schemes or systems. I just hope you must have seen this movie Inside Out. It's an animated movie and it's on Hotstar, Disney Hotstar. Yes, you can check this out. It's a wonderful movie. So this talks about core schemes that we have, or the core memories which form a lot of our personality we have, and often these core personalities, these core schemes that we have that form our personalities eventually, are found by us and our surrounding behavior when we are very young. right? As soon as we open our eyes, and we see a lot in this world, and there are a lot of things that we see, and there are a lot of stimuli. But then after a while, we start making senses of those stimuli, right? And when we make sense of those stimuli, we affect them, maybe as a good memory or as a bad memory, categorize them. And then they begin to form core schemes. Like, for example, some people are really scared of rats, and some people are very scared of lizards. Meanwhile, some are okay with it. So, like, again, they have their core schemes or systems about it. So the childhood experiences provided by the family and society develop core schemes or system which include beliefs and action patterns in an individual. So critical events in individual lives trigger the core, leading to the development of negative automatic thoughts. Negative thoughts are persistent, irrational thoughts characterized by cognitive distortions. Now, as I said in the previous therapy कि होता ये है कि जब हम बचपन में कोई चीज़ फॉर्म करते हैं, हाँ, जब हमारे पास बहुत अच्छी अंडरस्टैंडिंग नहीं होती है इस दुनिया की, हमारे को हर स्टिमुलाई का सेंस बनाना नहीं आता. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ यू most of us do not remember what we saw in our childhood, but even if we try to make sense of it now, because of the way we remember it, we cannot, because at that time our processing was such that we do not have in it to make a lot of sense out of the things that we are seeing. Similarly, if we tend to associate a negative emotion with them, right? If we tend to associate a negative emotion with a color, for say a black color, if we tend to associate a negative emotion with fire, then that becomes a very, very problematic situation, because you cannot stay away from something that is so common. You cannot stay away from white color, you cannot stay away from fire, because you will have to see it eventually. And eventually what happens is this begins to distort your reality. Like, for example, I remember I used to be very scared of vacuums. Very scared. I mean, still a part of me is very scared. And that is it, because I saw this movie and usme, vacuum used to talk and it used to eat children. So that. That was a horror movie actually. So yeah, but उस time पे मुझे समझ नहीं आया था कि vacuums can't actually eat humans. But when I saw it, I was very young. So this was an irrational fear that I developed. And apparently, as I grew up, I understood, okay, fine, vacuums can't eat humans, but yeah, they do make a scary sound. So this is it. So you have to make sure, in order to keep away from these negative thoughts and irrational fears dictating your life and distorting your reality, you have to process them. And when you fail to do so, when an individual fails to do so, then this causes cognitive distortions. Okay, so dysfunctional cognitive structures, patterns of thought which are general in nature but distort the reality in a negative manner. So these thoughts aren't like out of the blue नहीं होते ये. Yes, ये नहीं होते कि oh, meteor, oh, planet. No, they're not like that. They are there in the environment, they're very natural, they're very normal, but somehow, somewhere, they affect some individual differently than it does to you, and that differently is like zameen asman ka antar. Okay, so repeated occurrence of these thoughts leads to development of feelings of anxiety and depression. So, how does it work is that the therapist uses questioning, which is gentle, non-threatening disputation of client's beliefs and thought. Like अगर कोई client ये कहे कि मुझे वैक्यूम से डर लगता है, मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि मैं जब भी किसी वैक्यूम के पास जाऊंगा वो अचानक से चलने लगेगा और मुझे खा जाएगा, so the therapist is expected not to laugh, right? You have to be very understanding of why the person feels so. You have to go to the antecedent कि हाँ movie देखी थी, that is the antecedent, right? So the question makes client think in a direction of opposite to that negative automatic thoughts, meanwhile also gaining insight into his or her dysfunctional schemas. Like, for example, if I still have, fear of vacuums, I would go to a therapist and tell them. And the therapist would say, do you feel कि आप जब भी किसी वैक्यूम के पास गए हो, उसने कोई किसी साउंड निकाली या फिर something like that which is causing you harm. So they make sure your irrational fear is faced by a rational questioning, a rational view of thought. CBT. Now CBT is a very widely used and very famous and very successful, I would say, therapy. So it is cognitive behavior therapy, and इसमें बहुत short comprehensive होती है, ये बहुत लंबी नहीं होती, सालों सालों नहीं चलती. It's like 6 months, 8 months and 12 months. So this is how it happens usually. So it is short, comprehensive, effective treatment for a wide range of psychological disorders such as anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and borderline personality. And often, our generation is dealing with anxiety, depression, panic attacks, borderline personality, ADHD, वगैरह cannot be taken care of just by CBD. So you have to go for medicines and you have to go for pharmaceuticals. But yes, CBT generally deals with them. So adopts a biopsychosocial approach of the definition of psychopathology. So biopsychosocial. Okay. Bio is your biological formation towards something, your physiological predisposition. साइकोलॉजिकल है कि आपकी साइकोलॉजिकल वेलबींग कैसी है, आपकी साइकोलॉजिकल फॉर्मेशन कैसी है, आपका कंस्ट्रक्शन क्या है. सोशल मतलब आप किस कल्चर से आ रहे हो, किस एनवायरनमेंट से आ रहे हो. लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल, इफ अ पर्सन हुज कमिंग फ्रॉम, उसका बायोलॉजिकली दे आर नॉट वेरी मच नरिश्ड, a person fails to have such nourishment. Psychologically maybe they are traumatized in some way, or socially they are financially poor. So this is their biopsychosocial reality. So a person who would possibly deal with somebody like that would first look at the biopsychosocial the reality of that person, and maybe then module their therapy in such a way, which is very important. So combines cognitive therapy with behavioral techniques and originate distress has its origin in biological, psychological, and social realms. Okay, so humanistic existential therapy. So before we move forward, before we start the existential therapy, which is logotherapy, uh, often humanistic existential therapy या फिर इस पर्टिकुलर बिलीफ में बिलीव करने वाले जो लोग होते हैं उनका मानना होता है the essential goodness in man never dies. ये वो लोग होते हैं जो कहते हैं हर इंसान यूनिक होता है और हम किसी एक इंसान को या किसी बाकी सारे इंसानों को किसी एक केज में या फिर ऐसे किसी को ऐसे कैटेगराइज नहीं कर सकते. एवरीबडी इज डिफरेंट, विच इज ओके. एंड व्हाई डू दे फील दैट एवरीबडी इज डिफरेंट? इट इज बिकॉज एवरीबडी हैज डिफरेंट साइको सोशल रियलिटी. इनफैक्ट बायो साइको सोशल रियलिटी, क्योंकि उनकी सोशल कल्चरल डिफरेंट है, उनकी अपब्रिंगिंग डिफरेंट है. इवन दो इफ देर आर टू ट्विन्स लिविंग इन द सेम हाउस होल्ड गेटिंग द सेम ट्रीटमेंट, उनकी रियलिटी आर डिफरेंट, right? They have different personalities, which is in itself a big I would say evidence कि उनकी biopsychosocial reality is different. सो ह्यूमनिस्टिक वालों का कहना ये है कि सबकी जब ये चीज़ ही डिफरेंट है तो हम सारे ह्यूमंस को एक पर्टिकुलर केज में या उनके एक ब्रैकेट में कैसे रख सकते हैं. So this is the main idea of humanistic existential therapy. उनका कहना है कि regardless of how grave crime a person commits, they can always come back from it and be a good person that they always started with. So existential therapy, which is logotherapy given by Viktor Frankl, talks about treatment of soul, meaning making process of finding meaning in life. Threatening circumstances can be dealt with, and basis of which a person quest for finding spiritual truth of one's existence. So it's more like कि आप क्यों exist करते हो. It's taking out the layers one by one and talking about what is the purpose, how can you cleanse your soul, how can you be in touch with yourself, what is your purpose as a human, how can you contribute to the society. It is talking about all the good things in the world. It talks about themes of consciousness, conscious, pre-conscious, unconscious, but in the terms of spiritual unconscious. It says ki you all are spiritual beings and you should be aware of your spiritual unconscious self and the storehouse of love, aesthetic awareness, and values of life. Existential anxiety, which is neurotic anxiety or spiritual origin. So spiritual anxiety is leading to meaninglessness is also talked about. So the goal is to help the patient find meaning and responsibility in their life, irrespective of the circumstances. The therapist emphasizes the uniqueness of patient life and open shares his her feeling and values concept ideologies. Emphasis is on here and now, which is your present, and the therapist reminds the client about the immediacy of present. But the biggest I would say critique of this particular kind of therapy is that if somebody's reality is different from yours, how would you be able to understand their reality? unless if you want to step into somebody's shoes, you have to take your shoes entirely. And when you fail to do so, because our realities play a lot of role in how we perceive life, how we perceive humans. So if you are not able to take off your shoes entirely, how could you step into somebody else's, right? And all in all, this is more like long term therapy. It does not happen like 3 महीने में 4 महीने में. It takes years and years. Anyway, so client-centered therapy given by Carl Rogers says कि okay fine, clients should know their lives, right? मैंने भी क्या बोला कि हम एक थेरेपिस्ट होके दूसरे की लाइफ कैसे समझ सकते हैं, बट नाउ कार्ल रॉजर्स सेज व्हाई. एक क्लाइंट अपनी लाइफ को समझ ले, उसके लिए इतना ही बहुत है. इफ यू अंडरस्टैंड योर ओन लाइफ, इट्स इनफ. So in this therapy, the client himself, works on the concept of self. So हमारा self concept होता है freedom, choice and core of one's being. So they talk about themselves, they understand themselves, and when you're able to understand yourself, it's not necessary for you to make others understand you. आप अपने आप को समझे, that's more than enough. So in this way you're able to understand where are you failing, where you can work on them, because at the end of the day you have to make amends and changes in your life on your own. So the Gestalt therapy given by Frederick and Laura Pearl talks about increase in an individual's self-awareness and self-acceptance. The client is taught to recognize the bodily processes and the emotions that are being blocked out from consciousness. Therapist encourages the client to act out fantasies and feelings and conflicts used in group settings. Okay, this usually happens in corporate world. It is like a very new thing happening in corporate world now. Leadership therapies, this therapy and that therapy, so it's a part of that. Okay, moving on, we'll talk about alternative therapies. So if you remember in chapter 4, when I was starting and I was talking about how come we always talk about Western views and we never talk about Indian views. It's not like we do not have Indian psychology. We do have Indian psychology, right? Indian psychology is older than Western psychology, if I tell you honestly. But why is it always Western? Why are we always talking about psychodynamic? Why are we talking about behavioral? Why are we not talking about Indian? So apparently we do have Indian psychology, but it's not under the name of psychology, but philosophical sciences. So हमारे यहाँ कुछ philosophical text हैं, and in totality वो 6 text हैं, जिनमें से 2 बहुत major psychological text हैं, क्योंकि there are more psychology than philosophy, if I tell you. So one of them is yoga of Ashtang Yoga by Patanjali, and the other one is Veda, the Vedantic traditions, right? So that is given by our Sankara, right? So if you check them both out, you will understand the dual psychology, the cosmopolitan existence of human beings, and how it's all Brahman and Maya, Kaya. A lot of things are there. So if you want, you can always read it. Maybe after exams, not now because you may get confused. All right. So alternative therapies, may we have yoga, and yoga is not exercises. No, it's not. Yoga is actually a way, a way of humans attaining greater consciousness. It's a way of removing yourself from all miseries, be it physical, be it psychological, be it of any kind. It's all about removing yourself, getting rid of yourself miseries, so that जो miseries आपके रास्ते में आ रही हैं, they're getting in the way of you achieving the greater conscious, वो हट जाए और आप उन्हें अपने अपने आप से अपनी पूरी पूर्ण बुद्धि से आपका सामना हो. So that is the idea of yoga. So it's an ancient Indian technique entailed by Ashtanga Yoga by Patanjali. Refers to only asanas, which are body posture component, and to pranayam, which is breathing practices. Now asanas are, if you keep moving फिजियोलॉजिकली, अगर आप बॉडी मूवमेंट्स हर घंटे कर रहे हो, हर घंटे क्या हर मिनट कर रहे हो, तो हाँ कम आपका दिमाग स्थिर है. ध्यान लगाने के लिए दिमाग का स्थिर होना इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, राइट? सो अगर आपका दिमाग स्थिर रखना है आपको, तो यू हैव टू limit your body movements, and that is exactly the purpose of doing asanas, which is a very small segment of yoga जो हम समझते हैं is entire yoga, but it's not. Next is pranayam. So pranayam is constraining your breathing, right? Constraining, putting a hold on your breath, like not for long so that you die, but up to a point ki, breathe and breathe out. and focus and channelize your energy in such a way that you're able to concentrate and not just stay engrossed in breathing, because somewhere breathing is a very important essential aspect of humans existing, right? And when you're able to control that, then you become a very powerful being, right? एंड मोर इम्पॉर्टेंटली ब्रीदिंग जितनी ज़रूरी है उतनी लो, ताकि तुम्हारा ज़्यादा एनर्जी जो है सांस लेने पे नहीं बल्कि कॉन्सेंट्रेट करने पे जाए, ध्यान में जाए. So techniques enhance well-being, good mood, attention, mental focus, stress tolerance, obviously, and reduces the time to go to sleep and improves the quality of sleep. The reason why it all happens is because we are able to concentrate. हमारे attention span जो है वो increase हो जाता है. Okay, so factors contributing to healing. So naturally, if you are somebody who's struggling with some sort of, psychological disorder, syndrome, there are certain factors which could be contributing to your, I would say, हीलिंग प्रोसेस. तो अगर आप डॉक्टर के पास जाओ और आपको मुझे तो फीवर हो गया डॉक्टर, तो डॉक्टर क्या कहेगा, अच्छा चलो एक काम करते हैं, आपका सीटी स्कैन करते हैं पहले. And that is a wrong technique, right? सबसे पहले आपका डॉक्टर को टेम्परेचर लेना चाहिए. So it's all about what kind of technique you're using, right? आप किस टेक्निक को फॉलो करने वाले हो, एंड उसके बाद बताओ क्लाइंट को कि भाई देखो हम आपके साथ ये करने वाले हैं. ऐसा नहीं कि उसके मुंह में सीधा टेम्परेचर डालने के लिए thermometer डाल दिया. You have to make sure the person knows, okay, this is what is going to happen with them. तो थेरेप्यूटिक अलायंस सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज़ ये हो गई कि आपका क्या रिलेशनशिप है आपके क्लाइंट के साथ, आपका क्लाइंट होकर आपका थेरेपिस्ट के साथ क्या रिलेशनशिप है. क्योंकि चलो मान लेते हैं आपने रियलाइज किया कि यू नीड हेल्प एंड आप एक थेरेपिस्ट के पास गए भी, बट इफ यू आर नॉट ऑनेस्ट with a therapist, it's of no use. You're wasting your money, you're wasting the therapist's time. And at the same time, if you become very dependent and very attached to your therapist, because therapists provide positive unconditional positive regard, and obviously it's very hard for humans to find that kind of regard in general society, so that could also become a problematic situation. Next is catharsis. So catharsis is basically ridding yourself of emotions that hold you back, baggage जिसे हम कहते हैं, a lot of baggage to unpack. Gen Z, right? So that is catharsis. आपने जो अपना टोकरा भर लिया है उसे धीरे धीरे खाली करो, उसके बारे में सिर्फ बात मत करो. Start to unpack it. That is also very important. So there are a lot of ethics in psychology, therapy, this and that, but we'll look at the basic, the basic of basic ethics in psychology, that is therapy. So first of all is informed consent. आपको जो करना है, जैसे करना है, आप उनकी परमिशन लेके करेंगे. आप जानते कि उस बंदे की दिक्कत है, आपको पता है दिस इज हाउ यू विल हेल्प देम, बट इफ यू डू नॉट गेट कंसेंट टू इट, यू कैन नॉट डू इट, एंड यू शुड नॉट डू इट. यू कुड you could really end up in really bad trouble. So this is very important, informed consent, कि आपको कोई दिक्कत ना हो, आपके करियर को कोई दिक्कत ना हो, आपके क्लाइंट को कोई दिक्कत ना हो. सो गेट एन इन्फॉर्म्ड कंसेंट प्रायर टू व्हाट यू डू, राइट? कुछ भी करने से पहले गेट एन इन्फॉर्म्ड कंसेंट. Next is confidentiality. Like I said, kai baar, people, confess to crimes and they tell you stuff which is not socially acceptable in general setting. So in that case, a confidentiality has to be maintained only when the magistrate, so and so magistrate, requires you, not the lawyer, not anybody. When the magistrate requires you to come to the court and tell what happened, only then you can, otherwise not. Integrity. So integrity is how are you, inclined. So professional competence and integrity are basically the same thing. So how are you, integrally working towards your profession and how committed you are towards your job. You could basically cheat. You could basically lie. You can basically, fool people and get where you want to go. But this is not how you're supposed to do it. So आपकी integrity क्या है, आपका, conscience क्या है, this is all about it. एंड प्रोफेशनल कॉम्पिटेंस से जैसे मैंने बताया, इंडिया में कई सारे लोग जो थेरेपीटिक पर्टिकुलर देने के लिए तैयार भी नहीं होते, उनके पास प्रॉपर क्वालिफिकेशंस नहीं होती हैं, येट दो लोग थेरेपी करते हैं, पैसा कमाते हैं, विच इज़ रॉन्ग। सो दिस इज़ कि अगर आपके पास नॉलेज नहीं है, अब अगर आपके पास डिग्री नहीं है, आपको लगता है आपके पास डिग्री होनी चाहिए, देन गेट इट, बट डू नॉट डू इट अनलेस यू हैव इट। So this is professional competence. You should be capable of doing the job you claim to be doing. And how will you prove that? When you have the qualifications. And respect is, you have to respect the client will respect you. This is a very basic thing. Respect goes both ways. Okay, so rehabilitation. So there are occupational therapies also in which basic things such as candle making, paper bag making, etc. are used as a means to talk, teach work discipline. जैसे हम कहते हैं ना team work games खिलाते हैं and all that. So this is actually how to a person could learn discipline at workplaces. Vocational therapy is once the patient improves enough and gains skills necessary to secure any kind of employment. Like, for example, a vocational therapy could be that a person likes to, imitate sounds and could use that as an employment, right? So that could be one of those things. Social skills training. So this is the development of interpersonal skills which could be taught through role play, imitation, and it could be taught through conduction of events such as dance performances, sangeet, hasya kavi sammelan, and all that, which is also part of it. Cognitive restraining, so improves the basic cognitive functions of attention, memory and execution function. इसमें होता यही है कि बेसिकली आपको एक थॉट दिया जाता है एंड यू आर सपोज टू फोकस ऑन इट, यू सपोज टू थिंक अबाउट इट इन डीप एंड यूजुअली द prompts are not very complex ones. They could tell you grapes. Now you think about the grapes and you think and you think and you think and you think and you follow that train. This is cognitive restraint. आपको आपका दिमाग जो है, आपका दिमाग आपको नहीं बताएगा आपको क्या सोचना है, बल्कि आप बताओगे कि दिस इज व्हाट आई वांट टू थिंक एंड दिस इज हाउ यू विल थिंक इट. So this is cognitive restraining, and this is it for chapter 5, students. If you have any doubts, put it in the comment section. We'll look at it, and thank you.